Yes, another one. It's almost like there's a pattern. Look at it this way, at least the next one won't be interrupting a two-parter. Here's how the story stands as we head into the final season. There have been a handful of minor shortcuts this year, but nothing like the sort of progress we made in the previous season. The problem with making such huge gains is that you've not really got any way of topping it without getting home, so they just didn't bother. There has been progress of another kind though, as we're finally in regular contact with Starfleet thanks to the MIDST array. A handful of new aliens have been introduced, and shockingly, a fair portion of them turned out to not be violent. The Borg keep on Borging though, so there's that to deal with. Let's point our judgmental eyes at the crew and examine how the season has treated them. We got a look at Janeway's life without the Pips in the episode Fair Haven. She can't enter into a relationship with any of the people she'll spend the next 30 or so years with, so an exploration of how anybody would cope with that was welcome. We also saw a bit more focus on her in Good Shepherd. You could argue that was an example of her willingness to help her crew, though the shine's taken off that somewhat by realising she's done nothing about the trio for the prior 6 years. Okay, she's been busy, but it's not like they've had no downtime at all. We almost saw some actual backstory for Chakotay this season in the episode One Small Step, only for attention to pivot to 7 of 9 instead. We saw another small glimpse of his interests in blink of an eye, but again, it was incidental to the story. Chakotay again manages to be the second most underutilized character of the show, only slightly behind Harry Kim. I struggle to think of another TV series where the person who gets second billing on the opening titles is given so little to work with. Riddles gave Tim Russ a change of pace, something he's proven very adept at on previous occasions. This one goes even further and frees him from all of the requirements that come with playing a Vulcan. I've often derided the interactions between Tuvok and Neelix, as they regularly feel as though they're written to fulfill a comedy quota without any consideration to actual humour. It's pleasing, then, to see that the two of them are capable of being something that's far more fun to watch than a shit version of The Odd Couple. Very little attention on Paris this season, save for the episode Alice. It served as a sort of relapse of the dickishness that he's largely left behind him, though he's got the excuse of brain shenanigans being involved this time. Of course, that wasn't the case when he ignored B'Elanna in favour of the TV that she'd made for him, so maybe he's not all the way there yet, eh? I have nothing but sympathy for Garrett Wang. 6 years in and still very little of significance to show for it through no fault of his own. The only real look we got at him this season was in the episode Ashes to Ashes. Yet again, the story focused not on him but on events around him, further cementing his role as the guy that things happen to. B'Elanna gets graced with what was, for my money, this season's stinker. Barge of the Dead was a fairly interesting premise, shot entirely to pieces by a frankly dogshit script. Exploring B'Elanna's struggle to find her place in the universe, or perhaps more accurately that her desire to fill a role for other people in order to feel valid is based in her own lack of self-acceptance, could have been a welcome addition. Instead, the clunky dialogue and self-defeating plot points made it entirely skippable. Things weren't a lot better in Muse, where she decided to take a big old shit on the Prime Directive just to be in a panto. At least Virtuoso gave us a hint that her attitude towards the Doctor may have changed, with her being the one to explain that altering his knowledge base would fundamentally alter him as an entity. She's only rarely seen him as more than equipment prior to this, so the nod is welcome. We take a look inside the Doc's head this season, literally in the case of Tinker, Tenor, Doctor, Spy. An examination of his fantasies and how they all essentially boil down to variations on the theme of acceptance is a neat fit for everything we've learned about him in the past 6 years. Virtuoso shows the other side of the same coin and how that desire for acceptance can lead you astray. The whole thing comes to a head in Lifeline, where he tries to gain that same acceptance from his creator, the closest thing he has to a parent. The Doc's irascible nature generally being sparked by those who dismiss him gives us yet another parallel with many spicy brains, namely that the majority of his problems are other people judging him for what he is, instead of who he is. Not much this season for Naomi, unfortunately. Some incidental appearances, but one of them in Survival Instinct further cemented the bond between her and Seven. Her presence helped Seven to grapple with the concept of family, and again showed her to be one of the most emotionally mature people on the ship, despite her age. For an organisation that's wary of the Borg, we do seem to be collecting an awful lot of them. This season saw the addition of 4 more kids, perhaps spurred by the success of Naomi as a character on the show. Jin and Tonic have been mostly ignored, their presence rarely going beyond, "Oh look, they're twins!" Ramrod, on the other hand, got his own episode, and joined the shit parent support group after learning that he was used as a weapon against the Borg by them. The last is Mazzotti, who talked about cannibalism and electrocuted Paris to prove a point, so obviously she's the winner. In a surprising turn of events, we were rejoined by Kez again briefly this season. In an even more surprising turn of events, it somehow managed to make her departure from the show feel even worse than it already did. The story managed to take the long-standing moral compass of the show and portray her as a spiteful and vindictive monster who'll kill 100 people to make her own life more pleasant, a complete departure from everything that came before. And that's before you even start to consider the awkward questions the whole plot raises. Goodbye, Kez. You deserved better. Twice. The majority of attention was focused on Seven again this season, you could argue to the detriment of other characters. There's no doubt that her backstory is a rich vein of source material to mine for the writers, and I enjoy both the character and how Jerry Ryan portrays her, but episodes like One Small Step have arguably crossed a line and taken focus away from members of the cast who would have been better suited, especially when those other characters are sorely lacking in the detail that Seven has already been given. The addition of the Borgettes goes some way to diffusing that focus by showing how she reacts to being on the other side of adapting to post-Borg life. As an aside, you could argue that this now means each major female member of the cast has taken on a maternal role. Janeway has Seven, Seven has the Borgettes, and B'Elanna has Paris. Not sure I like the implications of that for a show which is supposed to be progressive, but here we are. A couple of episodes got thrown Neelix's way this season, but both were good examples of how the character has become something more than he was. Riddles gave him everything he'd ever wanted from a friendship with Tuvok, and he gave it up for the good of the crew and, arguably, Tuvok himself. The Haunting of Deck 12 showed not only how good he is with kids, but also perhaps that he'd learned lessons from his error with Naomi in the last season. He straddles the line of what the Borgette's Guardian wants and what he thinks is best based on his own experience, managing to make both work in his own way. Neelix has, along with Paris to a lesser degree, become the growth that I was looking for at the start of this journey. The season itself started off strong with the second half of Equinox, a view of what Voyager could have been if handled differently. Sadly, what comes after is mostly mid, a disappointment after the strength of Season 5, but there are still a few things worthy of praise. Live Fast and Prosper managed to strike a healthy balance between entertaining and silly, not the first time that Voyager has shown strength with this approach. Blink of an Eye gave us something a bit different from the normal fare, as well as threading things together quite cleverly. There have been turkeys, of course, but that's the norm. There's a certain irony to Star Trek's one constant, being its inconsistency. But all things end, and we can see the destination of our own journey in the distance. There are just 26 more episodes ahead of us, depending on the method you're using to count them, before we find out what ultimately happens to the crew of Voyager. I, for one, am looking forward to seeing how Janeway will explain all those murders what she done. The question I've been asked many times before is, what happens when we're done here? My answer has always been, dunno, that's not my choice. You see, the decision of where we'll end next is entirely up to patrons. If you're a member of the USS Pedant Patreon, I advise you to go there now and take part in the vote for which of the old Trek shows we'll dissect next. And it will be entirely up to you lot, as I'll not be taking part in the vote. I've previously expressed an interest in Enterprise or the original series, as those are the ones I know the least about, but we're going to get round to them all at some point, assuming I make enough money to cover the bills and don't unexpectedly die, so it doesn't really matter. As ever, the names you're seeing on the screen have made all of this rambling horseshit possible, and I mean that in a very literal sense, as their support is critical in this whole thing being viable. Patreon cash makes up the significant majority of what keeps this ship flying, so please join me in thanking all of those listed here. Thank you. End of summary.